The Chinese Communist Party is ordering large amounts of medical supplies from Chinese manufacturers, arousing fears the country is preparing for a second wave of the CCP virus. One expert says the virus is behaving very differently in northeastern China. He notes three major differences from Wuhan. China has kicked off its most important annual political meetings in Beijing. Authorities are also tightening their grip on suppressing ordinary citizens seeking redress from state governments. A pro-democracy local official in China was recently forced into a mental hospital by authorities. This after she went to Beijing distributing leaflets appealing for democratic reforms in China. And the Chinese Communist Party's latest efforts to infiltrate Hong Kong's legal system. CCP officials introduced a new national security law, and Trump says the U.S. will react strongly if the law is enacted. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The Chinese Communist Party is ordering large amounts of medical supplies from Chinese manufacturers, arousing fears the country is preparing for a second wave of the CCP virus. New Yorker Moshe Malamud has done business in China for over 2 decades. He told the New York Post his Chinese suppliers in recent weeks have been overwhelmed with orders from Chinese authorities. One supplier told him it's been contracted by the Chinese government to produce 250 million gowns. He asked why Chinese authorities are ordering so many gowns, but got no answer. He says other manufacturers told him they're focused on manufacturing for the Chinese regime in anticipation of a second wave and will be until the end of summer. Last month, leading U.S. manufacturers told the White House that China stopped them from exporting face masks, testing kits, and other protective gear from China. Signs of a second CCP virus outbreak are appearing in 3 northeastern Chinese provinces, Jilin, Heilongjiang, and Liaoning. According to Chinese media, one expert says the virus is behaving differently in northeastern China. It takes longer for the virus to become detectable than in Wuhan. This means a higher risk of clusters of family infections. Patients are also taking longer to recover. Another major difference is that the virus from the second outbreak mainly attacks people's lungs, whereas the virus in Wuhan attacks multiple organs. Chinese research shows the CCP virus has mutated into at least 30 strains. Researchers from the US and Britain say there are already hundreds of mutations. It's been 40 days since Wuhan lifted its lockdown, but there's still fear of a second outbreak. Residents are afraid authorities are still downplaying the situation so they can't go out. So it's hard for businesses to survive, and many shops have closed. In this video, the shop owner says business hasn't improved yet. My products are on sale from 60 yuan. It's about $8. There's no profit. I just want to get rid of my stock. The problem is nobody is shopping. He says the store beside him sells shoes. He said they moved out yesterday after losing over $14,000. Shops on this street are closing one after another. Maybe it's a good idea to close and stop losing more money. I really don't know what to do next. The U.S. Committee on Foreign Investment, CFIUS, has reportedly ordered the splitting of a joint venture between Chinese investors and California company Exo Bionics Holdings, or Exo. Exo manufactures exoskeletons, which are wearable robotic devices that help disabled people work. It also works with the U.S. military. Last year, the company struck a deal with a Chinese venture firm, Zhejiang Yuchuan Venture Capital Investment, to access Asian markets. Under the deal, Chinese investors poured $5 million into Exo stocks. CFIUS checks foreign investment transactions in the U.S. for national security risks. Dr. Richard Levitin, an American emergency room physician, has observed silent hypoxia in some CCP virus patients. That's according to a CNN report. He explains these patients came to the emergency room with blood oxygen levels as low as 50%. Their x-rays looked awful, and yet they're completely awake and can even use cell phones without a problem. Wu Changten, a physician from the biggest hospital network in Taiwan, told us that once the blood oxygen level drops to about 90%, patients should have shortness of breath, be gasping for air, and have blue lips. Like a very serious situation when blood oxygen drops below 50%. This normally only happens to people who have congenital heart disease and people who are dying. He said it's terrible if a patient doesn't show symptoms when the body is already in a very critical situation, because he is not aware that his lungs and other organs like the heart, kidneys, and brain already are severely damaged. Dr. Wu thinks that only when the situation worsens to a critical point will a serious respiratory failure occur. He says more research is still needed in the area. A pro-democracy Chinese official was recently forced into a mental hospital. Her daughter tried to rescue her but was threatened by the authorities to keep silent. China's annual political meetings began today.
Feng Xiaoyan, a researcher for China's local legislature, the People's Congress in Linyi City, Shandong Province, has been forcibly admitted into a mental hospital. She was detained after distributing pro-democracy leaflets in Beijing on April 28th. According to an SOS letter sent out by Feng's daughter, the researcher criticized Chinese authorities' mishandling of the virus outbreak. She also appealed for democratic reforms and called for a re-election of the regime's leader. Feng was immediately arrested in Beijing. The next day, police sent her to Linyi Mental Hospital in her home city. Feng's 20-year-old daughter visited her on May 7th. Feng said she was forced to take pills each day, adding that she started to suffer from insomnia and became confused.
I cannot fall asleep. I suffer from nausea and vomiting. I told them that I was originally a healthy person, but since I came here and took your medicine, I now become like someone with mental problems.
Are you still taking the medicine now?
Yeah, I'm still taking the medicine. They won't allow it if I don't take it. If I refuse, they will pinch my nose and force me to take it.
Feng's daughter is worried about her mother's worsening health. She asked for her family members' help, but they told her being anti-Chinese Communist Party is the same as being psychotic. Feng Xiaoyan worked in Linyi City's public office for over 20 years. Due to her criticism of the Communist Party, Feng was barred from being promoted and was restricted from traveling abroad. Last October, she was detained by Chinese authorities for publicly supporting Hong Kong's pro-democracy protests. This time, Feng was detained just before China commenced its annual political meetings, the two sessions, which began on Thursday. Chinese authorities have a history of tightening control and ramping up crackdown orders on dissidents before and during the meetings. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
As China's biggest political event of the year gets underway, authorities are cracking down hard on citizens who seek justice from their officials. NTD's Juliet Song reports.
China's most important political meeting of the year has kicked off. At the same time, authorities are ramping up efforts to suppress people seeking justice from their state governments.
The crackdown is intensified during the meetings. Also, different regions are ramping up efforts to intercept and arrest petitioners.
Petitioners in China are citizens with grievances. It's difficult to defend their human rights through the legal system, so they often travel to Beijing to seek redress. Authorities in Beijing are imposing even stricter measures this year to keep them out of the public eye. A petitioner from a northern province got a phone call from his local government after he ordered train tickets to Beijing. They asked him to not go.
So basically, it means right after I placed the order, my personal information was passed to the local government through the security apparatus. They know exactly when I'm going to arrive at the Beijing West Railway Station, on which train and at what time.
He was snatched off the train by staff from his local government, one stop before his final destination. Tsai has been a petitioner for almost 2 decades. He suffered from commercial fraud in the early 2000s and has been seeking compensation for years. Tsai went to Beijing not to petition this time, but to take care of some personal matters. The local government again sent people to follow him around.
They say, our upper management has instructed us not to let you leave our site once we see you.
Petitioners from various regions in China report that local governments are arresting and intercepting them. A petitioner from Shanghai said she knows others who are trying to go to Beijing to appeal, but now all have been intercepted and arrested. Reporting by Xiong Bin and Juliet Song, NTD News.
At 3 p.m. on May 21st, the most important political meeting in China, the two sessions, started. The sky in Beijing suddenly turned dark, as if it were nighttime. About half an hour later, it started storming with thunder and lightning. After that, it turned dark again. Some netizens commented that heaven is destroying the Chinese Communist Party, as both man and gods are furious with it.
Hong Kong facing new challenges today after the Chinese Communist Party said it plans to impose a new national security law. Details of the law haven't been revealed yet, but President Trump says the U.S. will react strongly if it goes through.
President Trump said Thursday the U.S. will react if China follows through on plans to impose a new national security law on Hong Kong.
I don't know what it is because nobody knows yet. If it happens, we'll address that issue very strongly.
The law, which is expected to pass, would allow the Chinese regime to bypass Hong Kong's legislature. Critics say it would further erode Hong Kong's autonomy. U.S. Senator Josh Hawley said in a tweet Thursday he's introducing a resolution that calls on free nations to stand with Hong Kong. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal says 2 U.S. senators plan to introduce a bipartisan bill to sanction CCP officials who enforce the national security law. Pro-democracy lawmakers and activists in Hong Kong condemned Beijing's latest move.
I just want to say to the international community that this is the end of Hong Kong. This is the end of one country, two systems. Make no mistake about it.
Referring to Hong Kong's legislature and judiciary system, meant to be independent of the regime, as promised to them when China took Hong Kong from Britain in 1997.
Today, I think that it's the saddest day in Hong Kong history.
Local Hong Kong media reports say that if enacted, the law could go into effect as early as August. Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
The details of the regime's new law on Hong Kong will be announced tomorrow, and the U.S. senators say the new law means getting the legislation passed even more urgent. The White House on Wednesday issued a report on challenges to U.S. national interests posed by the Chinese regime. It details economic challenges, security challenges, and challenges to American values, such as the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on Wednesday said compared to the hundreds of thousands of lives lost and trillions of dollars of damage, the money offered up by Beijing to the World Health Organization is paltry. Beijing pledged the organization $2 billion. Pompeo said he looks forward to seeing them fulfill that commitment.
China's been ruled by a brutal authoritarian regime, a communist regime, since 1949.
He said the regime has not changed its nature, despite the U.S. giving China opportunities to become more like a free nation through trade, scientific exchanges, and diplomatic outreach over many years.
We greatly underestimated the degree to which Beijing is ideologically and politically hostile to free nations. The whole world is waking up to that fact.
He said the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP's actions during the virus outbreak opposed the qualities of openness, transparency, and responsibility. He said Beijing continues to withhold virus samples and access to facilities and to censor discussion. The White House on Wednesday issued a report on challenges to U.S. national interests posed by the regime. It details economic challenges, security challenges, and challenges to American values, such as the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Pompeo said the pandemic is the result of the CCP's failures in stemming the spread of the virus. With roughly 90,000 American lives lost, more than 36 billion Americans losing their jobs since March, and globally more than 300,000 lives lost, Pompeo said the true cost of the pandemic is estimated to be as much as $9 trillion.
The U.S. is set to sell $180 million worth of advanced torpedoes to Taiwan. The Chinese Communist regime is upset about the deal. The regime considers Taiwan a part of itself and has vowed to reunify it.
The State Department has approved a sale of advanced torpedoes to Taiwan. China denounces U.S. weapons sales to Taiwan. The communist regime considers Taiwan part of China and has vowed to annex it. Democratically minded Taiwan staunchly opposes reunifying with the authoritarian mainland. Taiwanese military officials say they'll use the weapons as a deterrent to regional threats and to strengthen homeland defense. China has stepped up its military drills near Taiwan since the re-election of anti-communist President Tsai Ing-wen, flying fighter jets into the island's airspace and sailing warships around the island nation. The U.S. is bound by law to ensure the democratic island has the means to defend itself. Taiwan will pay $180 million for 18 Mk-48 Mod 6 advanced technology torpedoes. They're capable of autonomous operation or can be controlled via wire link. Quieting technology allows the torpedo to be fired covertly and minimizes detection.
A nonpartisan society of students are demanding universities and colleges close down Confucius Institutes. Their president says the CCP-backed programs are propaganda outlets and give people a warped perception of China and the regime. NTD's Miguel Moreno has the details.
The CCP-backed Confucius Institutes have been under fire for years for suppressing free speech and promoting a slanted perception of Chinese history, among other things. But a newly formed nonprofit society of college students from across the U.S. is pushing back. The Atheni Society is demanding that American academic institutions shut down Confucius Institutes.
We're setting up more than 25 Atheni societies across the country to go after Confucius Institutes and to confront authoritarian influence and protect academic freedom and the rights of students. We are doing that with effectively no money. No money relative to some of the other organizations that have done these sorts of things.
Up to date, at least 86 Confucius Institutes are being propped up by universities, colleges, and school districts. Hanban, an office within China's Ministry of Education, says the program aims to promote Chinese language and culture in foreign countries. But education and China experts have criticized them for trying to shape students' perceptions of China. Their staff go as far as teaching that Tibet and Taiwan are Chinese territories and also avoid talking about the regime's human rights abuses and political history.
If we don't have an accurate perception of China, if we don't have an accurate understanding of the Chinese Communist Party, we can't actually make effective, well-informed decisions. And that has implications, that has costs, that has consequences.
O'Connor also said Chinese students are the most affected by Confucius Institutes. He said there were some incidences where people from these institutes or other Chinese organizations physically intimidated his friends from Hong Kong at UC Davis. Ultimately, he wants them to be held accountable, which he said isn't happening because universities give them way.
When you're having a totalitarian government preventing people from being able to speak out, and and the university just says, tough luck, we don't want to infringe upon their freedom, it's just wrong. And that's what's happening.
A U.S. subcommittee reported that from 2006 to 2018, China had pumped over $158 million in funding to U.S. schools for Confucius Institutes. But nearly 70% of universities and colleges failed to report that they each got $250,000 or more in foreign gifts from Hanban. The Atheni Institute's Washington appeal says that academic bodies can choose to continue to benefit from an authoritarian state or they can stand by the right side of history, but they can't do both. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
Calls to reduce dependency on China are increasing in the U.S. and also in the U.K. Some are concerned the U.K. is too reliant on China, not just for consumer products like laptops and phones, but also medicine. Our UK correspondent Jane Wirrell reports.
Chinese investment in the UK covers a diverse range of sectors, from energy to real estate, technology and entertainment. Over the past 9 years, China invested more than $55 billion into the UK, the highest in Europe. And in 2018, the UK was the largest European investor into China, as exports in goods and services reached $83.7 billion. But hopes that deeper economic ties would lead to political liberalisation in China are fading.
The country has not moved forward with liberalisation and democratisation to the extent that we hoped, and has instead moved into a different trajectory, one that is increasingly authoritarian and revisionist.
A recent report by conservative think tank Henry Jackson Society said that the US, UK, Australia, Canada and New Zealand, those are the countries that make up the powerful Five Eyes intelligence sharing community, are strategically dependent on China. Its analysis shows the UK is reliant on China for 57 separate categories of what's classed as critical goods. These include active pharmaceutical ingredients used for painkillers, antibiotics and antiviral medicine.
And so we have an unlevel playing field that makes it hard for companies in the UK to compete with Chinese companies because you're really competing with the Chinese government.
Gibson said China gained the global dominant share in pharmaceuticals by undercutting and using unfair trade practices, not because their products were better quality. One example is from 2018 when the FDA recalled blood pressure medication made in China, which was found to be contaminated with a cancer-causing toxin.
The world is dependent on China for thousands and thousands of medicines that are used in hospitals every day. including those that are needed to treat people with COVID-19. People want to trust the medicines and the personal protective gear coming from China, but its track record is really very, very concerning.
President Trump recently awarded a new US company a contract to manufacture drugs and pharmaceutical ingredients. It's a shift to not depend on any one country like China for critical supplies. While British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is known to historically be in favour of deals with the Chinese regime, he's facing mounting pressure to toughen his stance. More than 20 British lawmakers wrote to the International Trade Secretary last week, seeking to amend a bill to reduce dependency on critical goods from China. A new group was recently set up by UK lawmakers to debate policies towards China. It follows calls from some that the Chinese state should face a reckoning for its handling of the pandemic. Jane Worrell, NTD News, London.
Voting by mail has hit a snag in Texas. On Wednesday, an appeals court stopped a federal judge's ruling that would have allowed everyone in the state to vote by mail. It's a win for Republicans and the president, who have called mail-in voting a path to voter fraud.
Texas voters afraid of getting infected with the CCP virus had the right to request a mail-in voting ballot until Wednesday. An appeals court put federal judge Fred Beery's decision on hold after his ruling the day before. It's a win for parties worried about voter fraud like Republicans and President Trump, who threatened to cut funding to Michigan if it allowed mail-in voting for everyone without a reason, like being sick.
We don't want them to do mail-in ballots because it's going to lead to total election fraud. If there's a reason for it, that's okay. If there's a reason, but if there's not, we don't want to take any chances with fraud in our elections.
Beery had justified his ruling by saying that being susceptible to the virus is a physical condition. In Texas, people who suffer from a disability like a sickness or a physical condition can vote by mail. But Texas Attorney General Paxton appealed the decision, arguing that being fearful is not a disability. On top of that, he said 2/3 of election fraud cases he's prosecuted involve mail ballot fraud. These fraud cases often involve a practice known as vote harvesting. That's when a person not authorized by state law collects an unspecified number of mail-in ballots and submits them on behalf of others. According to many Republican lawmakers, vote harvesting, while legal in some areas of the U.S., is more likely to result in tampering and election fraud than in-person voting at the booth. The federal judge's decision is now temporarily on hold. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
Over 600 doctors are urging the president to end the national shutdown meant to curb the spread of the CCP virus. They say the measures are causing a growing number of other health problems. Our reporter Kevin Hogan spoke with a psychiatrist about the health consequences of staying locked down for so long.
600 doctors wrote to the president on Tuesday warning him of the fallout of keeping lockdown measures in place. They called it a mass casualty incident, meaning there are more victims than resources available to help. Psychiatrist Dr. Lieberman says there are other health consequences to the lockdown that need to be considered.
There are people committing suicide. There's child abuse. There's domestic violence that has increased. All of these things. So there are consequences, and they have to be weighed along with these numbers of people, being admitted to the hospital or ICU and so on.
The doctors wrote the lockdowns are causing 150,000 Americans a month to miss out on early cancer detection. They also cited a 7-fold increase in calls to suicide hotlines since the lockdowns began. Dr. Lieberman referenced studies that show people who watch the Twin Towers fall over and over on the news developed post-traumatic stress disorder. She says staying home and constantly watching the news about the virus is no different.
But we're watching the news of how many people are dying, and we're watching, other kinds of frightening, life-threatening things. And it's happening to us, too.
Dr. Lieberman cautions against following the CDC's strict guidelines on reopening. She says it may take too long to get the infection parameters low enough to satisfy their requirements. Meanwhile, people are suffering from the harmful effects of isolation.
And those conditions alone can cause physical and psychological problems, from heart attacks physically to anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. So staying at home is not without consequences.
In the meantime, she says it's important to be creative and use the downtime to read a book you never had time for or catch up with old friends. Kevin Hogan, NTD News, New York.
Turning now to international news, the Olympics chief said the games originally scheduled for this year could be canceled completely. European countries will start buying virus antibody tests from Roche, and case numbers in Latin America keep rising.
Britain has agreed to acquire over 10 million antibody tests from drug and medical device companies Roche and Abbott. The European Union and US had already approved Roche's tests, and Britain now follows their lead. UK Health Secretary Matt Hancock said an antibody surveillance study has shown around 17% of Londoners have already had the virus. Latin America has overtaken the US and Europe, now reporting the highest number of new virus cases globally within the past week. Latin America accounted for around 1/3 of all new cases worldwide last week, many of which come from Brazil. A US Air Force plane delivered the first batch of medical aid to Russia. The shipment included 50 ventilators to help the country cope with a rising number of virus cases and deaths. Russia's number of infections is now the second highest in the world. The Tokyo Olympic Games have already been pushed back to 2021. Now, the head of the International Olympic Committee says the world's biggest sporting event would have to be scrapped altogether if the event can't be held next summer.
A soup kitchen in New York City is seeing its food giveaway program grow in popularity as the virus pandemic puts more people out of work.
The operator of a meal giveaway center in New York City says the demand for food is doubling every couple of weeks.
We started grab and go around March 15th, and each week steadily the numbers have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. The need is very prevalent.
People who were unemployed before the virus hit are now even more unlikely to find work, and many are no longer eligible for unemployment benefits.
I've fallen behind in my rent. I've fallen behind in food. I mean, I'm at a point right now. I'm calling the food stamps.
Well, right now I'm out of work because of the coronavirus. Now, that's about it right now. So I'm waiting for everything to go back to normal.
The food pantry is funded by donations and government funds. The Grab and Go program the pantry started at the outset of the pandemic now has long but quickly moving lines. The program operates out of Manhattan's Chelsea neighborhood 5 days a week. Last week, the program served almost 15,000 meals.
Finding a job is more difficult now because with all the laid-out workers, you have a lot more competition. All the formerly working employees are now competing for jobs, the little bit of jobs that there are.
Many of those seeking meals are illegal aliens who are out of work and have few other resources.
Here at China in Focus, we dedicate ourselves to bringing you truthful, unbiased reporting. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the latest updates, and see you tomorrow.